Nice to see such a wonderful turnout for such a special event. And, I'm very happy to be able to offer the space for this to happen. It's a nice intimate space. Do we have any newcomers here to the Mansfield Playhouse? Are you all from Mansfield? Where have you been? We've been in this building for 55 years. This is our 55th season. We're a small community theater. If you don't know much about us, we are the second oldest community theater in the state of Ohio. And Brian has offered me the opportunity to introduce myself. My name is Doug Wirtz. I am the artistic director down here. And once we get going with the season, it just rolls. And we are having a lot of fun. We got a lot of shows. So hopefully you can grab a pamphlet on your way down and out tonight. There's some pamphlets out downstairs. You can see some of the shows. I'm going to ask that you visit MansfieldPlayhouse.com as well. You can see what's going on there. We are open to the public, and we are very affordable to the public. And that's part of our mission, building community through the experience of live theater. And that's what we do, and we have a lot of fun doing it. So hopefully we get to see you guys come back and be a part of it. It's a lot of fun. We have open auditions for those aspiring actors and actresses, and we're always bringing new talent locally onto the stage. I can't tell you how rewarding it actually is to be able to see people grow, and then the friendships that develop, sometimes lifelong. I'm going to plug this current show that you see on stage right now. It's an absolute all things Hitchcock parody. It's called Wrong Window. And it is, if you know Rear Window, that's not it. It's Wrong Window. And it's apartment across the way is only 39 steps. So, it is what it is. And we talk about things, the problem with Harry and all of that other good stuff. But it's a lot of fun. It's a murder mystery comedy, situation comedy, and I hope you can join us. It opens up next Friday. Adult tickets are only $13. Seniors are 12, and students 12 and under, which I'm not going to recommend for this particular show, but they are $8. So you can see we're very affordable for quality live entertainment here. Without further ado, I'm going to ask that we all be courteous for one another here. Silence your cell phones at least, and we all know that there's emergencies that arise. You want to have access, but please silence your cell phones. And without further ado now, we will bring up Mr. Gladden. Thank you very much.
And I watch the news and spin doctors and on CNN and Fox and watch the march on Washington and Seattle and Portland burn a bit. I mean, this has been Billy Joel's "We Didn't Start the Fire" condensed down to a Tide Pod concentrate in 2 to 3 years. And I guess I got a little angry, and that's what prompted me last year to start this. Now, if you think about it, our community hasn't had really a true enemy or monster in a long while. And those monsters that we could identify and know, so when I was in high school and college, Russia was the monster. We knew and we could identify that monster and go, that's it. And that actually gave us a peace of mind because we didn't have to worry or watch or search for what was the monster. Once that went away, and we had a little bit of like relaxation and enjoyment for the win, I guess, if you call it a win, we eventually at some point got like, well, who's next or what's next? And then Al-Qaeda came, and that was then for a minute the identified monster. And we can identify COVID now as a monster, but the things that are scarier and maybe were less identifiable, what was going on in the background this whole time, was like racism and sexism and the things that we knew about, but we weren't willing to identify and go, that's actually a monster. So the things that we can identify, those are the easy ones. The things we don't want to identify, I think those are actually the scarier ones. And this particular symposium is the monsters we meet at the Crossroads. And the Crossroads can be anything. So me actually putting on this presentation was a crossroads in my mind, because I'm like, am I the right person to do this? Here I am, a white, straight male. And maybe it shouldn't be me. But after I went out and I talked to my friends, I talked to Mark, I talked to Victoria, and the response was, I think this has to be done. And so I went forward, and then afterwards, the response and feeling I got back was, thank you for doing this, let's keep doing this, and let's grow this community. So I recommend you please listen to the presentations tonight. We're going to get out of order a little bit. Kip is stuck in traffic for a minute. There was an accident on 71. He'll be here. So I'm going to have Mark Jordan go first. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our Master of Ceremonies, Mr. Steve Russell of the Mansfield Richland County Public Library. He is the Workforce Development Coordinator. I want to thank the Mansfield Playhouse for letting us use this beautiful space. I want to thank the Phoenix Brewery, and after this conversation tonight, if you want to join us afterwards, we'll go down for a pint. And I also want to thank Woven, NECIC, OSU Mansfield. So without further ado, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, and welcome, folks. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers tonight to speak on the theme that Brian mentioned, the monsters we find at the Crossroads. And here's how it's going to work. We have 5 speakers. I'll give them a brief introduction before they step up to the stage. And then at the conclusion of the 5 speakers, we'll have a question and answer session. So if anyone's got questions, save them up. And at that point, we can have a session with everybody back up on stage again. Our first speaker this evening is Mr. Mark Sebastian Jordan. Other people take shortcuts. Mark takes long cuts, exploring the byways of history and music. Mark has won awards and grants from the Associated Press, the Ohio Theatre Alliance, the Ohio Poetry Association, Case Western Reserve University, the Ohio State University, Mansfield and Richland County Convention and Visitors Bureau, Richland County Foundation, Ohio Arts Council, Ohio Community Theatre Association Chapter, and the Ohio Tourism Commission. I should also add on a personal note that he also does some theatre directing from time to time, and in fact has directed me on this very stage in You Say Tomatoes. His next book, The Witch of Mansfield, The Tetch Life of Phoebe Wise, will be released in the fall of 2023 by the History Press. And I've seen Mark give a talk on that subject, and fascinating story it is. So I'll invite you now, Mark, to step up to the stage.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm used to performing on a stage and projecting a bit, so I'm not going to use the mic if everyone can hear me, okay? Can you?
Yeah.
Very good. If I trail off at some point, just shout at me or throw something, and I'll get the volume back up there. I have 3 things for you tonight. First, I want to take you somewhere. We're going to go to southern Mississippi at the height of the Great Depression in the mid-1930s. It's night. It's close to midnight, a moonless night, where you can barely make out the fields around you and the woods in the distance. You're walking along a road. You're carrying a guitar. You see the old Dockery plantation as you walk past it. you see just barely in the dimness that you're approaching another road. You look around. You look up and down both roads. You don't see anyone. You're alone out here. You're thinking, am I on some kind of fool's errand out here? But you keep walking. You step to the center of where these two dusty country roads meet. And look around. No one. But you take that guitar, feeling kind of foolish, and you hold it up high. And you strum a D minor chord. And it sounds sour, weedy, out of tune. But at that exact instant, out of the corner of your eye, you notice someone approaching. A man, a big man. Maybe he's dressed in black, or maybe his skin is the color of night itself. He's big, and he's walking right up to you. And he has his hand out, and he says, "Let me tune that for you." You hand him the guitar. He tweaks the strings until they ring, and hands it back to you. You hold the guitar up, and you strum a D major chord. And it rings and sings. Even the very leaves of the trees tremble with the sound of life itself. Then you know the transaction is done. You say to the man, "Thank you." And he says, "You're welcome, Robert Johnson." Or so the legend goes. 2. Let's talk a different version of things. There was a young boy growing up in the Mississippi Delta. A poor region, lots of hard-scrabbled workers. Not that many decades past slavery, with a lot of people still working as sharecroppers doing essentially the same job, but at least being able to say, well, I'm free. I'm doing it for myself. I'm doing it for my family. I'm making a living. I'm making a life. A lot of people proud to be on the straight and narrow road, living a good life. Young Robert Johnson was enthralled with music. He loved singing in the church. He loved picking up any kind of instrument that he might cross in his adventures and try to start playing. That included such low-life instruments as the juice harp, the mouth organ, better known as the harmonica. But he liked trying to make music with those things. And then as he got a little older, he started noticing the blues performers who would come into town and stand on a street corner playing for tips and telling people they'd be appearing at the juke joint on the edge of town that night, and that y'all should come out and hear me. And once he got into his teens and his parents were too exhausted from a day of work to watch his every move, he found he was able to slip off to that juke joint and listen to these blues men and sometimes women. There were blues women too, people like Bessie Smith and Memphis Minnie, who played the Southern Circuits. But he could hear these people, and he could hear something in that music that reached into him and grabbed his heart. Here was something where a man could speak freely with emotion, with passion, could sing about fear, could sing about depression, could sing about anger. And it moved him, it grabbed him. He wanted to be one of those performers. So he found a way to get a guitar. And he listened to great blues performers like Son House, tried to start learning that style, imitating it. And one day, in 1929 or thereabouts, he went into a juke joint and he asked the manager if he could play that evening, if he could open up for the great Son House, who was his idol. And the manager said, "Sure, kid, get up on stage, show us what you got." He got up there and he played his music. And the people turned and looked at each other. And you know what they said? They said, "Well, he sucks." He's got a bit of a singing voice, but it's too churchy. You can't really dig into it. And Sunhouse himself later said, man, his guitar playing was embarrassing. That's how bad he was. People essentially laughed him off the stage. That very night, Robert Johnson gave up a life in music, realizing, wow, I'm not up to this. I can't do this. And then he disappeared for a couple of years. And a couple of years later, sometime in the early to mid-30s, he suddenly showed up and asked to play again one evening. And this time, when he played, people's jaws dropped, because they were witnessing the birth of one of the all-time greatest blues singer-songwriters that has ever lived. We only know that from a very slim amount of material that was recorded in the mid-1930s during a period of just 7 months. Not long after that, he died in the process, inventing what we now call the 27 Club, which was later populated by Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, and other such people. Well, he invented that way before them. But during this brief period of time when he found his voice, he became one of the greatest creators of music known to mankind. Well, he had disappeared for a period of time, so people don't really know what he was up to. And when Sunhouse heard the re-emerged Robert Johnson, his first comment was, man, boy, did you go and sell your soul to the devil or what? Well, Robert Johnson was a bit of good marketing when he heard it. So he did nothing to dissuade that kind of talk and gossip. And he even wrote it into some of his later songs. Songs such as the Me and the Devil Blues or Hellhound on My Trail. And it really picked up steam and became the legend that we know today. But there's something I want you to consider. Folklore works in metaphor. Abstract ideas can be hard to latch on to. Sometimes if you take an idea and put it into a story, then you can appreciate it so much more. Well, there's a phrase that used to be used by church-going people in the Deep South when someone left the straight and narrow path, especially if it was someone who perhaps had been a prize singer in the choir and then left and went to the low-down dirty blues out the juke joint. Well, the phrase would be, well, he's gone and sold his soul to the devil. So guess what people said about Robert Johnson? Did he literally go to some crossroads and sell his soul to the devil? I don't know about that. But metaphorically, you bet he did. 3. A road is a world. When you are on a path, that is the world of your existence. Think of ancient sacred architecture. There is always some kind of straight path leading to it. When they used to train people in the shamanic tradition, part of that training would be envision yourself flying from here to there in a straight line, or from here to the top of that tree, or from here to the top of that hill. Because that's a sacred path, one that cannot be stopped, one that cannot be impeded. That's where the whole term, the straight and narrow, comes from. But what if you are on a road and you come to a crossroads, which is a different path, a different world, the meeting of two worlds, the liminal space in between two different frames of existence. And you suddenly realize, am I on the right road? What if you come to the crossroads and you discover that the monster is you? The false you, going down a pathway simply because everyone has told you that's where you should be. That's what you should be doing. Do it like this. Do it the way we tell you. You know, there's a lot of people in this world with power and money. And oh boy, do they want you on a straight and narrow path, because when you are on a straight and narrow path, that's when they can control you. That's when they can beat you. But if we all dare to look at the crossroads and understand and identify, as Brian was saying, what the monster is, then sometimes the crossroad can be the gateway to another world, a different path, a complete freedom. And if we all identify our monsters and take on our true paths, what can the rest of the world do to stop us? We be unbeatable. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Our next speaker is an artist.
Any questions before I go?
Oh, we're going to do Q&A at the end.
All right,
Thank
great.
you, thank you, Mark. Our next speaker is an artist, musician and poet who has devoted over 20 years to social services, primarily working with adults with developmental disabilities and those recovering from addiction. Aurelio Diaz represents the 5th Ward on Mansfield City Council and is Mansfield's first Hispanic, openly gay and independent party-affiliated councilperson. Aurelio's goal in life is to constantly walk the path less travelled by dovetailing his passions for art, music and poetry with advocacy and local politics. By doing so, Aurelio is confident that in the process, this will cause more worlds to collide, become acquainted and spark active community transformation. Aurelio, if you'd like to step up here.
You guys are so lucky. I wore my most expensive basketball shorts for this event. And my beverage. Well, Mark, how do we follow that? So when Brian asked me to participate in this, I was so honored. I was hoping to do it last year, but I couldn't. But a lot of things happened within a year. At the time, I said if I were to do it last year, it would have been a whole different topic. But a lot has happened within a year. And it's strange because for the past 20 years since I've been back in Mansfield, a lot of people have known me to speak about the same things that are passionate to me. Things like advocating for people with disabilities, speaking about music, art, and poetry. Those are always kind of my go-tos. If you had told me years ago that I would be speaking or involved in local politics, I would have threw my auto harp at you. But this is where we're at now, and I'm very grateful. And when it comes to Crossroads, I was really trying to think the crossroads of my life. The crossroads that the monsters at the crossroads of my past have always been not really individuals. The monsters have always been myself in different stages. Ego, your ego is like your dog. Are you walking it, or is it walking you? Monsters as in terms of being judgmental and self-righteous. Really just being possessed. So when I decided to run for city council last year, I did so because I was very energized after being a part of the Mansfield Rising Group in 2018, which was a group of folks that would involve the city ultimately to develop a plan to transform the city by including everyone in the city who typically isn't involved. This was very exciting. A lot of good things has come out of it, and I learned through that I can do advocacy in a whole different level. I can work with people who just aren't who have disabilities, and I saw that there was a lot of needs in the ward that I lived in. There were safety concerns, just people being disregarded and not involved. It was the same people on the boards, same people in the committees, and it was very discouraging, and the morale was low for young professionals, artists, and other minorities who wanted to be a part of something but were never welcome or were pushed away. So when I decided to do this, I had a lot of support from my family and friends, and also told, Aurelio, you better prepare, you better get a tough skin. None of that really bothered me. I knew I would be able to handle anything thrown at me. I've been pretty transparent about everything about myself, from my personal life to my professional life, so I wasn't really bothered. But I was very excited to help transform, or not transform, but really change the way people saw politics, because we knew that people weren't voting and getting involved. So how do we make politics more person-centered rather than party-centered? And that was something I didn't think was really important until last year. So I've always had democratic principles, because that's how I was raised. We were told, when I was old enough to vote, if the ballot says Democrat, you vote for them. Don't ask questions, vote for them. I have friends who are Republican, you're raised the same way. You just do it. But when I really started to get involved in the city and get involved and do my research and see all the different local candidates, I saw that there was problems. There was a lot of candidates who weren't worth my vote. There were a lot of candidates who were phony, I felt. There were a lot of candidates who were lazy, disconnected with the community, and just wanted to be a politician, Democrat and Republican. I said I would never be that way. So when I was campaigning last year, I was really encouraged by people who I considered mentors and a few I considered friends. I was encouraged to not really develop friendships and meaningful relationships with people who are different from me. Conservatives, because I was told they're bad. I was raised to think they were bad. So up until I become an adult, I used to think that myself. But I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna use my initiatory skills. I'm gonna knock on doors. I'm going to knock on every door that says Trump or Biden sign. I don't care. I was terrified of that. I was scared. We really experienced a lot in the past few years after 9/11 and obviously post-pandemic. And let me tell you, once I got past that fear and got to know people, knock on their doors and talking to them, and us really having a commonality of, wow, we all want the same things. We want a safe neighborhood. We need something for our youth to do. We want to involve everyone in the city. We want new jobs. We want to find ways to keep our young professionals here. All those were the things that we had in common. And I felt so bad when I would leave those door knocking sessions. Like, wow, I walked up on that doorstep just expecting the worst. I was the judgmental one. And in the process, I really learned that I was wrong, So when I actually got elected, I really wanted to challenge the system a bit more. I really wanted one of my good friends, who is a Richland County Commissioner, Mr. Tony Vero. I don't think any of you guys know Tony Vero. I actually do. I really wanted him to swear me in, to really show our community that this is no longer about party. There's nothing wrong with being a part of a party. There's places for it, there's purpose for it, but it's not for everyone. When it becomes a cult mentality where you can't ask questions, when you can't interact with other people, it's a problem, it's a monster. It's a monster that wears a MAGA hat, it's a monster that wears a pussy hat. So I asked if, Tony Vero could swear me in, and I thought it would be a good thing. We got a lot of support, but then we got a lot of pushback from it. How would it look? Well, I'm like, it's going to show that we're building bridges together. We're like coming together. We're making some progress. I'm not the only one doing that, and it was largely discouraged to do it. So I regret it, but I'm like, fine. Well, I won't even pursue it. When I was elected, in my first few months, social media, wow, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? It can help you, it can hurt you. In this case here, it hurt me because, I was very open and I wanted to share with the ward I represented the things that I was doing, not to have it be self-serving and pompous, but I knew that was a ward that had been overlooked for 7 years, and I wanted to show that I was trying to fulfill my promises by being engaged and just doing my best to help them. But I didn't expect that posts and pictures of me with friends who were conservative would get me in trouble. So suddenly I just saw a shift of people vilifying me and just really coming for me. And like I said earlier, I always had a tough skin. I'm like, oh, whatever, I've overcome worse than this. But it was harder because I'm a lot older now. I feel like I'm more invested in the community. Whether I like it or not, people are going to watch you, and people are going to somewhat look up to you. You shouldn't change who you are, but it's still hard because there are multiple people, my family too, family members and friends who had so many opinions about, oh, you sold out. You're really a disservice to, the Mexican community and the gay community, which is silly. And it hurt because I'm like, well, maybe I am doing it wrong. Maybe I'm being a martyr, I don't know. But luckily I had supports and friends and as Mr. Jim Cooley taught me, meaningful relationships in my life who helped me see that I wasn't doing the wrong way. It was the monsters. And monsters aren't bad people. I did look up a definition here. One definition is monster can be an inhumanely wicked person. I would never go that far to say that against people who I felt really targeted me and were nasty, because I don't think anyone's all good. I don't think anyone's all bad. But I am very grateful that I've had several people in my life who were there when I was questioning myself, and they told me that, this is no longer about you, it's about the people you represent. And the more I really heard that, and was being, I chose to distance myself from people who were not critical, but just hateful. The more I did that, the more happier I became. It was maybe a month or two I was struggling there. And but I gotta say, it's like, I feel it's the best thing I've done. When I hear the term independent, it doesn't mean it's better than a Republican or a Democrat. I am so not political, y'all. I didn't even start voting locally until 5 years ago. So, but you have to be political when you're being involved in things that happen in your community. It's basically advocacy and helping each other and giving of yourself. And I want to say that in the process, I didn't really conquer the monsters with the two hats on. I conquered my own monsters of being judgmental and being scared, and I feel like I've been elevated to a whole self-awareness that I never expected, that I'm very grateful for. I feel less hateful. Actually, I feel less angry. I feel less selfish, and I feel like I am more eager to get acquainted with people who I'm told not to, and I'm more eager to get acquainted with people who are vastly different than me. And I'm so happy that I'm there, because I thought that I would transform the more I worked in social services, and I did, but it really took giving of yourself and people not wanting it to help you realize, you're doing it right. And so I think I'm looking at my cheat sheet here. So the monsters, like I said, were basically me, the belittling, the spewing hate, but my triumphs go much more further. And my hope is, as whether it's an election season or just wanting to volunteer or get involved in your community, tear down your own barriers, and I encourage you, really encourage you, to get to know someone who you would consider your enemy just because other people tell you they're your enemy. I made a goal for myself when I was campaigning last year, and my sister, I love my sister, and she would say, don't go in this neighborhood. You're going to get beat up, don't do this. I'm like, no, I'm going to do it. And I got to tell you, I would tell her my stories of, Anna, I was wrong, you were wrong. And I really feel the more I tell her these experiences, and my mother and my brother, I see the change in them too. Not even with politics, but with humanity. And I don't know, it's a whole just unexpected, welcomed change. And I hope that when we are voting for people, we're doing our homework, we're getting to know who they are as humans, what they've actually done for our community, what they've done for groups and communities. Not so much their resume. Anyone can run for office and say they're going to help you and knock on doors. What they've done before, and once they don't win an election, are they going to be here or are they going to move away? It's not about party anymore. And I'm so excited when I see this new energized vibe nationally and locally where people are no longer wanting to be just red or D, because that shouldn't be your identity anyway. So, yeah, that's my goal. In the next 3 years, continue to help Ward 5 thrive, but most importantly, help people realize that we need to be engaged and vote for those and support those, like Jody Perry, based on merit and who they are, and that's my monster tale. So thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Aurelia. Kip Curtis is an Associate Professor of Environmental History and the developer of the Microfarm Project, building local food systems in Small City, Ohio. Kip moved to Ohio from Florida in 2015 to join the faculty of the Ohio State Mansfield campus. Since 2017, he's partnered with Deanna West Torrance and NECIC to launch the first microfarm system here in Mansfield, now comprised of 8 farms organised into the Richland Grow-Op Cooperative. Since 2020, he's partnered with organisations in Marion, Ohio to replicate the micro-farming system. He's published a book, Gambling on Ore, an environmental history of 19th century American mining, and several articles on mining, environmental thought, and food systems. He thinks Mansfield, Ohio is one of the greatest communities in the world. Kip, please.
Appreciate everyone coming out tonight. This is called The Monsters You Don't See. So when I thought about Crossroads, I thought about the necessity of choices that life presents to us over and again. Because decisions made at Crossroads affect all decisions that follow. So these are weighty places. They come with consequences. Crossroads, for this reason, are scary places too. They're ripe with uncertainty. And when I think of scary places ripe with uncertainty, I think of monsters. But not the monsters you're thinking about, not giant hairy ogres or mindless zombies. The monsters I'm thinking about are the things we don't ever see at the Crossroads. These monsters live in the blind spots and behind the blinded directionality of decision-making. They haunt us at the edges. Sometimes we become aware of them, but often we only catch glimpses, and sometimes not at all. So I grew up on a semi-sustainable farm in the 1970s where we worked our small 20-acre plot to provide vegetables, protein, and heat to our 8-member family. I hated farming. I associated it with our poverty, and in a world where personal computers were becoming a consumer reality, it seemed somehow a failure on my parents' part. So I went as far away from farming as I could, studying in New York City and writing a doctoral dissertation on the history of mining. In 1984, I was promoted to manage a small homemade ice cream shop on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I was 18 years old and living on my own, and it was the most money I had ever earned. And then the day came when my management called me to corporate offices to have a gentle conversation with me about hiring. The staff is too black, they told me, complaining that the previous manager had just hired friends of friends. I thought the staff was perfect. One of the kids was a regular extra on the Cosby Show. Others were working hard in high school to get into good colleges. I said nothing, left the meeting, and quit the job. I would not do their dirty work. A few years later, in 1987, I was walking with a friend near my apartment in Brooklyn, crossing in front of a high school where groups of students stood in energized packs, buzzing and laughing and sharing gossip. I bumped the shoulder of a young man stepping backwards. He flexes, I apologize, and continue on my way, only to be jumped 1 block later and find myself in the middle of a fight in the middle of the sidewalk.
Police were called, my friend seemed to have a concussion, and the boys were rounded up. They were unapologetic and brash, but just kids, and African-American boys at that. Are you going to press charges? The cop asked me in a demanding sort of way. No, I'm not. His glare could have melted aluminum. You let them go and they're just going to do it again. Whatever, I told him. They're kids. I'm not hurt. Much later in 2004, I worked for a small nonprofit with a big building in suburban Boston, Massachusetts. We had 7 full-time staff members, but occupied a 14-room Tudor mansion, as well as an adjoining library and archives. Down the hill from our offices, the city had preserved about 25 acres of farmland, and we were leasing it to an organization that taught farming and produce marketing to inner-city youth. Groups of half a dozen or 10 young adults would work for hours in the fields, planting, weeding, and harvesting crops. I wanted to offer them educational programming, and I met with the program director in their office, who told me the real need at the moment was shelter from bad weather. That'll be no problem, I told him. That'll be a problem, I was told the next day when I asked. It's too risky. Some of the pictures on the walls are worth thousands of dollars. Our purses and food are stored in the kitchen. They could be loud and disruptive. We never hosted those youth, and I left the organization as a result. So 3 crossroads, 1 monster. We know it's there, right? The monster. But what is it? So the easy answer is racism. It's easy to see. It was self-evident to me in each instance. And in each instance, I felt a deeply righteous indignation, a sense of moral wrong. I distanced myself from the perpetrators, both physically and in my identity. I would play no part in that monster. I am not that monster. But monsters are never that easy. On the morning of August 8th, 2007, 3 years after the last of these incidents, I walked into an elementary school. Sorry, I get real emotional about this. Where my wife and I had just enrolled our daughter for kindergarten. I was anxious and stressed because we had neglected to sign up for a school in the county's choice program, and we were getting whatever seat was left. Worse, we were the only white parents in the office, which was teeming with children, and the squeals of delight that erupt early morning at the beginning of the year. And I felt awkward and stupid and completely out of place and uncomfortable in my whiteness. And I was berating myself for our neglect, and my thought, this is going to be the worst school, was unconsciously reinforced by the blackness that surrounded me. Is my daughter even going to be safe at this school? I asked myself, irritated and annoyed. And then I looked around again, and I saw 5, 6, 7-year-old children, babies. Sometimes the universe puts you in places and spaces where the real monster slips into view. Not the monster you thought you knew, but the real monsters that always hide in the shadows. The things inside ourselves that we really don't want to see. I realized in that moment that that monster I had avoided so diligently had just erupted inside of me. And it was a sobering moment that forced me to look my own monster in the face and figure out what to do about it. I decided to double down on the situation, to leave both my children in the school, to buy a house in the neighborhood, and to invest my time and energies there. On paper, it wasn't the school that parents would choose. It had a falling grade throughout the years my children attended, and in those years, it became a magnet for difficult-to-reach children. But we were talking about elementary school. And my wife and I are both educators, so we didn't worry that there would be instructional deficits. And there weren't. Both children are now in college and full scholarship. But our choice to engage with the school and my choice to genuinely confront my monster also unexpectedly opened new understandings about the real needs that existed in schools that aggregate low-income children. These children do not need more academic coaches or sample tests or detention, which was where funding was directed in struggling schools. More than anything, we discovered, a lot of the children needed genuine mentors and meaningful pedagogy, which were painfully absent especially for the hardest to reach children. Confronting the monster allowed me to bear witness to circumstances I would otherwise have never known. And then one day in 2008, I was teaching about sustainable agriculture in an environmental studies program, and I mentioned my childhood on a sustainable farm, mostly to emphasize how difficult and unappealing it was. But a group of students responded as if I had said I could spin gold out of straw, and despite my several obstacles, they coerced me into helping them to build a garden. Not on the college campus, where they wanted it outside their dorms, but in an elementary school schoolyard where they could mentor children in elementary science education. This garden project grew into a class, and this class grew into a schoolyard gardening program. This schoolyard gardening program grew into a community organization, the Edible Peace Patch Project. Today, the Edible Peace Patch Project, 13 years later, continues to operate schoolyard gardens as part of an in-school and after-school mentoring program in 8 Title I elementary schools and middle schools in South St. Petersburg, Florida. Because of the work that I did in community food systems in Florida, I came to understand that a key challenge facing urban agriculture and its promise to bring food, jobs, and education to low-income urban places was the lack of a viable model for growing and marketing food. The microfarming system that was built here in Mansfield and our building in Marion is an effort to address that absence and build a local food production system that is accessible, equitable, and profitable for low-income families. My professional successes over the past 15 years, which is mostly comprised of a whole lot of gardens and microfarms, operated under values-driven purposes in marginalized places, stemmed directly from facing that monster that was me back in that elementary school office. A monster I had avoided at least 3 times before, because I did nothing for those employees in that ice cream shop. My arrogant belief that my departure from the business would expose the manager's bias said more about my own sense of privilege and importance than it said about my racial politics. And a few months later, the servers were all white anyway. And I did very little for the boys who jumped me and my friend. Those high school boys gave me, my friend, a serious concussion and left me too frightened to walk that block for more than a year. I didn't see them as people. I saw them as victims in the face of police and then potential predators in the next year ahead. And I did nothing for the farm working youth. I never took steps to try to address my director's concerns about youth in the building, to open a negotiation or build a bridge. I literally just shut down when they said no, and I nearly drowned in my own righteous indignation. I actually did no better than the perpetrators of the wrong I perceived. You see, the monster I faced that August morning wasn't just about my unreconstructed fear-based racism. It was about the authenticity of my own life. It was about whether or not my moral compass and my embodied behaviors were truly aligned. The monster was my own self-deception around that. So how does that work? Well, the first 3 vignettes offer a case study in the actions of this kind of self-deception. In each instance, I was evoked with a sense of righteous indignation accompanied by a severe judgment of someone else's moral failing. Righteous indignation and blame. We should pay attention to those feelings when they erupt in us, because I think the real fuel of righteous indignation is not to be found in the moral failings of the world, as much as that seems to be the case sometimes, but in the presence of an unseen monster. The intensity of blame and often disgust that we feel for the other in these circumstances acts as a form of denial. It externalizes an interior and mostly unconscious conflict, and by doing so leaves that conflict firmly in place. In other words, righteous indignation only feeds the monster. It might even make it stronger. So you'll face many crossroads in your life, and those crossroads will most definitely be haunted by monsters you don't see. But if you pay attention, especially to those places where you feel the strongest moral aversion to some exterior phenomenon, you just may catch a glimpse. And if you do, don't turn away, even if it's difficult. That's your chance to slay a monster. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Deborah Wheeler is a native of Bowling Green who joined our Mansfield community in 2010. She's a graduate of BGSU in Special Education, University of Toledo in Educational Leadership, and University of Michigan in Organizational Leadership. Deborah has been an educator for 32 years, a teacher, a school principal, followed by her work in program and grant development and implementation for community non-profit agencies. Currently, she is the principal consultant for Woven Opportunities LLC, a new Richland County firm working with organizations and schools to improve programs through the lens of emotional intelligence. Her ability to understand and grasp not only the macro of a project, but then to break it down and understand the micro with both passion and logic make a project whole and completely fleshed out. Deborah, please join me.
First off, thank you so much for having me this evening at the Monster Symposium. I'm honored. I came this evening to talk to you about community connectiveness and how my personal experience has helped me along this path as I fought some of my very own monsters. I can't do this without giving you a little backstory of where I've been. I moved to Mansfield in 2010. As a consultant, I spent very little time in Mansfield. Since then, in 2014, I was hit by a semi-truck. I stand here as one person of the 1% of people that live to tell about this. They didn't think I would live. They didn't think I would walk. My life partner, and now wife Claire, was rearranging our life to take care of both of us. It was significant recognition of the limitations that people put on other people. But as you can see, it really did not work out that way at all. It took me 8 months to sit up. It took me about 3 years in total to get to a point where I could interact and be able to hook my thoughts and my words together. But what I could do, and what I did do, was I read. I have invested 16 years in formal education, and I learned to think again by reading. But what I realized in reading is that I was reading differently. Where I used to read based on fact, I began to read and then reinterpret how that worked and what my experiences were that developed around that reading. So one of the authors I hooked onto in that period of time that was significant for me is Simon Sinek. So I'm not sure how many people have given themselves access to this author and speaker and podcaster. He's really quite famous. Simon Sinek allowed me to sum up some things for myself. I was a special needs teacher. I was always looking to close the gap on inclusion. I was looking to help people to fit in. I was always there as an advocate and trying to determine what needed to happen next in order to take it from a starting point to making some gains for folks. I applied that again as a school principal, and I started to consider myself a change agent. And when I started to consider myself a change agent, I thought to myself, I'm really good at what I'm doing. I really know how to do this. And I was empowered by people, And I really did work hard and do my best, and my values came right to the front of the race because I was furious at some of the actions that were happening in systems, in schools, in families. When I read Simon Sinek's book, he had a model for me that stuck out. I know it wasn't particularly for me, but in this particular case, it really was evolutionary for me. So if you could picture a big dartboard, he calls it a golden circle. Okay, so if there's some ego in that, yeah, maybe. So a big dartboard, the outer circle is why are you doing this? Inner circle, what are you doing? And the most inner circle is how are you doing that? So I'm not sure I would have had the words before reading this book and knowing how to apply that to my career prior to the accident. But after, I was able to see, okay, well, I know what I'm doing, and if each of you can take just a moment and think about, okay, so what am I doing? How am I doing it? It's got value, right? But then when you apply the why, and you start thinking, why am I doing this? We become so rote and so aligned in our thinking and following what other people tell us that we need to be thinking and what we need to be doing, that we forget to ask ourselves, why in the heck am I actually even doing this? Do I even think this fits? So Simon Sinek said, as an organizational change person, that if you're an organization and you know what your what is and you know what your how is and you don't know what your why is, you are completely unsustainable and your business is really going to go down the... And for the most part, his research shows that to be perfectly true. So as I lie there, and I'm healing, and all these people are taking care of me, I mean, so many people came out of the closet for me. They showed up, they wrote cards, and as a person that's not extremely religious, okay, not at all, they prayed for me. And I started thinking to myself, after reading this book, I know how this happened, but why? I have nothing to give them back. I understand why Claire did it. She loves me. She was invested. We're longtime life partners. She was my person. But when I started to hit my crossroads of understanding around this, my why changed. And my why turned into asking myself, why is that person doing that? Why do they feel like that? Why do I need to be observant and not pigeonhole people? So my why turned into community application. And what it did was it really opened up my arena of connecting with not people who were necessarily exactly like me. The kid that grew up in a home that many dream of, the kid that grew up wanting for nothing, but not one person knows all of my why. They only know the outside exterior of my why. They don't know that there was trauma and dysfunction within my family. And so when they looked at the outside of what was happening for me as a child, hold on here a minute. They thought I was a special needs student. Because I couldn't focus. I couldn't concentrate. I didn't have the courage to talk. So when I figured out how to apply this why to people and what my community responsibility was, that when I didn't understand what was happening, or I didn't understand why somebody was the way they were, or what my personal responsibility was to reach out and make effort to move into a space that was different than the space that I lived in that was comfortable. That it's actually in that movement forward in that space that you say, you know, maybe that person doesn't look like me. Maybe they don't have the education that I do. Maybe they go to a church that I really don't agree with. But by God, I can guarantee you that if you dig into that person's why, your headspace is going to go to a different place. And where it's going to go in to, and I ask you to lean into this, is it's going to lean into a place where you're empathetic, where you're inclusionary. So I'm a special needs teacher. I really get that inclusionary part. What I really don't get is why exclusionary efforts take place. So as you lean into this, I encourage you, if you take anything away from this 10 to 12 minutes, that you start in your own relationships to ask why. Because as a result, our community will become more diverse. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Our final speaker this evening is Deanna West-Torrance, the founder and director of North End Community Improvement Collaborative. In addition to her work at NECIC over the past 20 years, Deanna, a former City Council member and Mansfield City School Board member, has served on numerous boards, councils, task forces and committees. She attended the University of Cincinnati and Southern New Hampshire University and is an alumnus of the Harvard Kennedy School Executive Education Program. She has a lifetime certification from the Bridges Out of Poverty Program. On a more personal note, Mansfield and Richland County is her beloved home, and her passion for her home can be felt by all. Having raised her 3 sons, Adam, Taj and Elijah, and 1 daughter, Maya, while not working, Deanna enjoys spending time with her family and friends. Please join me.
Good evening. So as I looked around the room, most people who know me that talked to me tonight heard me say, I have no idea what I even want to say tonight. I really was prepared, but so much has happened in the last week that I just feel like we could go in a different direction. So bear with me. I'm going to be super transparent. My topic today was on when false evidence appears real at the crossroads, which we often know that is FAIR, an acronym, or FAIR is an acronym for that. And I thought about the different crossroads and different times in my life, and then I'm going to come from a very personal kind of place, as others did, but also most of you know me from NECIC, and so you kind of know who we are. And for those of you who don't, I hope you leave knowing me better and knowing us better. I think that throughout my life, first of all, I want to talk about my bio. I'm not that formally educated. I have sat in a whole lot of classes, but the city of Mansfield in Richland County has been my teacher in my classroom. And I don't think I know anything more than anything about anything than I do about my community. I think I know a lot about this place that we call home. And many times my crossroads throughout my life have been to stay or to leave. Am I going to stay in Mansfield and go to school, or am I going to leave? There came to a point in my marriage where I have 4 children. All those 4 children are 1 year apart, each of them. So there was a time when, with my marriage, am I going to stay or am I going to leave with a 3, 4, 5, and 6-year-old? And I decided to leave. There was a time when I made a decision, do I want to go back to school and finish the college education that I never really got started well enough, or will I go into the workforce? Those decisions, those 2 decisions were really, really critical in my life and kind of made me the person that I am today. And that was because the monster that I had to face was fear. We know the saying, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. And that was my big thing, just being afraid, literally, of almost everything. Everything can be a monster. Anything that you can't see can be a monster. Anything that has the potential to catch you unaware can be a monster. So for me, after many, many years, I learned that that's the only scary thing. Because otherwise, I'm pretty well armed to slay some monsters. Pretty well armed. But I think it's the doubt. I think it's the fear itself. When you look and you come back and you say these problems that we're working with. So in my case, it's the neighborhood that I grew up in. There are 5 generations of my family that lived in one house on Minor Street in the north end of Mansfield. It was an incredible neighborhood. I'm 53 years old. And so it was I lived in a home that my grandparents purchased in 1944. And they were the first African Americans on their street. And I grew up hearing stories about watching. By the time I came, it was more African Americans, but still pretty integrated. And now, mainly African Americans. And so, watching and hearing how things changed over time, it's so interesting to sit in the audience and hear. And I don't want to be offensive, but most of you know me, so I'm going to just say it. But like, it's really interesting to hear white people process racism. It's really, really interesting to hear that. That's not something that most of the time you get to hear. On the other side of that is being the experience of racism. And so how that hits individually and how that hits collectively can be very different. So it may not be that someone calls you a name, or my first incident with racism, I went to Discovery School. The second year it was open. I went to O.C. Hill, which was prevalent school. And I was working ahead of grade, and there was an art teacher at Miss Shepherd's daycare, if any of you know Inez Shepherd. And this art teacher came in and said, she should go here. She should come over here. So they took me to this new one-room school that was in the woods on Millsboro Road, and that's where I went to school. And what I didn't know was I didn't know that those were some of the wealthiest children in the community. I didn't know that I was part of a school that had a really unique philosophy called individually guided education, and that my experience throughout my life would be based on those experiences at that school. And being on this side and not looking at all of you who look different than me as being monsters has been my journey. And I think that at the crossroads, when we're making decisions, I think it's interesting to remember that, and what I heard over and over was it requires us to reflect on ourselves. It really, really does, even on this side. So this neighborhood, so I get to leave my neighborhood and go get this incredible education, even as an elementary school, that ended up probably being more impactful than anything I've ever done since. And I got to bring back the good things that other people had back to my neighborhood. And it was a different perspective about things. It was a different way of looking because I wasn't being given, I was with people who were being taught that the world was theirs and that they could, within them, there was this innate thing. You can go out and get whatever it is that you want. You can slay the monsters. And that is not what that experience is in the neighborhood. That is not what it is. People give you what they want. They're benevolent. You are the recipient. You are, you're always othered. And so my challenge in coming back, as I said, I got divorced, I came back, and in 1999 I started working with Dr. Mark Redding, who was the first person who showed me what was going on in my neighborhood, and that was that we had third world birth rates, third world birth outcomes as far as low birth weight and infant mortality, and that was the first thing. Like, our babies died differently over here. And then it was a number of different things, but I'm not a doctor, and I'm not smart, I'm not educated, I don't know what to do about this, but I could write and I could talk, and I kind of know some people, and so my whole life it was basically overcoming the fear that I was going to be adequate for the task that I was up against, because there have been some really unique tasks that I've been up against. And so what that required me to do as these monsters, and I'm going to say my monster was fear, remains fear, will probably always be fear, was to really look at all of the things, the tools I had that proved that that was false evidence appearing real. The facts proved that I was good at certain things. The facts proved that I was worthy of these tasks that I was up against, that I was up to the challenge. Recently, in this community, I'm sure if you saw the paper, there was recently, and we are looking to build a new community center on the north end. And it's a $12 million project. And so I don't feel up to this task, right? So it's just huge. But it's the culmination of 22 years of work and of marching towards that and of gaining an army, many of which you all are a part of, as I look out here and see all of you that are with me often, that we really do have the power to change that we really did have the power to address not just the monster that scared me of fear, but the monster that many of you talked about. Fear of other people, fear of people who look different than you, fear of that neighborhood, fear of that person, fear of that man. You know, that fear can be deadly. I have 3 sons that I absolutely, if you know me, you know how I feel about them. I adore them. And the thought, as I watch them grow, that one day people are not going to see them anymore. They were cute little boys, but one day they're not going to see them like that anymore. And I have 4 grandsons, and to know that one day people aren't going to see them as this little cute 3-year-old. So I think that at every point throughout Crossroads, when we do come into contact with that, with those kids, with that neighborhood, that we kind of do realize that it is our own fear that is causing the issue. It's our fear sometimes, and even how we react to that. So I didn't just want to talk about racism, but I really did want to talk about this week and being faced with something so huge and so big and yet so massively satisfying, and that is the creation of something that was lost, and that is, 7 schools in the north end of Mansfield closed. And then they say that African American kids, like we, or families, and that was said by people in this community to my face who were in leadership, that Black parents just don't care about their kids' education. So let's not just say that, but let's systematically lead to the closure of every school so that it's difficult, more difficult. Education is something you gotta go over there and get. Healthcare is something you gotta go over there and get. Healthy food, thank goodness for Kip Curtis and his microfarm project that we have an oasis of food growing in the middle of a desert, of a food desert. Where there wasn't a grocery store in the neighborhood, and because we see a dollar store here and a drive-through there, we feel like that neighborhood is fed, but then on top of that, you can overlay horrible birth statistics and health outcomes and all the negativity that comes because we were afraid of the people, and so we were afraid to invest in them. And so now, my charge as a 30-year-old newly divorced single mother of 4, I was the 5th ward councilwoman, and that was the first. That's Lord. And that was for me where I learned a lot of the same lessons that Aurelio is talking about, and how my village needed to be bigger, and my village needed to be more diverse, and I needed different kinds of warriors because the neighborhood's going to be there. But you got to connect all out here. And so I think that for me, part of that that false evidence that I'm not up to the charge, I'm not as smart as these people. When I first started kind of being on the scene, it was largely white men, mostly older white men. So there was ageism, racism, sexism, very, very prevalent. I was told, you sit out in the lobby as a councilwoman speaking to a group of people. You sit out in the lobby, even though I'm your keynote speaker, because the women have their purses inside. I was told that about the Holiday Inn up there. So, I have a million stories, but to counter that, I have 3 million stories that were not that. And so I think that there is evidence that some of these things are real, but I think that a lot of times it is false, and that when we do come to those crossroads that we do, I know for me it was to look back and say, what's my track record? I've slayed some monsters before. I can do this thing. And so each time the monster gets bigger and bigger, and now it's a $12 million building. But it's the most important thing. It's what is right. It is what should be done. It is backed up by real evidence. And so I know that the only thing between me and that building is that monster. And we've dealt with that monster before, so I'm sure I'll be fine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet. Well, folks, what a fascinating series of talks we had tonight. It was really, really fascinating to be part of the audience for that, as well as introducing people. So a big round of applause for everybody who Now, I'd like to invite all of our speakers back up to the stage, if they would, because we're going to have a question and answer session with the audience. Brian will be here to repeat questions if necessary, but we'll see how this works in terms of what dance. Interpretive dance, yeah, cool. Feel free to go ahead. All right, anyone with a question would like to kick us off? And it can be for an individual member of the panel, or you can address it to everybody.
Or comment, not question.
Yes, sir.
Just a little prelude to my question, because the question might seem strange, because I want an answer from each one of you. I've been, fortunately, not as severely in each of your shoes, but I have been there. In a couple of cases, even more so. I've been in the classroom 59 years. I've been retired for 13. So I'm counting first grade all the way through until I retire. There are 2 people in here that know me fairly well. There's one other person who knows me well enough. There are 4 people in here that should know me, but I bet they don't remember who I am or why. But the one question, and there are times when you were talking that I, and there are times, yep, and lump in my throat and whatnot. I went through just about the whole gamut of feelings. What I would like each one of you, because it's going to kind of solidify my thoughts, hopefully in a very positive way. I'd like each one of you, and you see me as I am. You know probably nothing about me other than what you see. Give me one, starting with my left. Tell me one thing about me, just by looking at me and what I said. I know it's a hard question. It might seem to be unreasonable, but basically when I've heard all of you say, I would like a little feedback. This, as I said, kind of solidifies the.
So may I clarify the question to say what you're asking feedback on is
You're looking at
interpretation of whom I'm looking at?
Kind of, I don't mean a whole sentence, a single word or anything.
So I really do try to engage at the why point. And so what I see is somebody who's inquisitive, which leads to lifelong learning. And it is an incredibly open package, and that is courageous enough to walk through getting feedback.
Thank you. My wife was a special ed teacher. city schools last, I don't know how many years at Clear Fork. And I had an inclusion teacher with me. And it was at the beginning of the day when she was wide awake and I was half asleep, so it worked out quite well. Thank you.
I see you as what I might phrase, a teacher in the first degree, which is to say a teacher who is at heart a student, eternally. That's what strikes me immediately about you and about those questions, those comments.
You are smarter than you think you are. My son-in-law.
Say that again. What did you say? I heard the first part. What was the second part you said?
The second part was, you sound like my son-in-law. He made people believe he's not that smart. And he is, in your own ways.
First thing I see is an older white man, that's, to be honest. I think based when you say what you said, I definitely feel like you sound like a teacher. I'm trying to see if I know you. I don't know if I do. If you're like a former teacher, I might know you. Do I know you?
We've come across each other a number of different times, a number of different places.
Okay.
Neither one of us, I think, told the other person her name.
It's hard to see, so I'm sorry, I really can't
I know
see.
you want to go ahead.
But I'm the one that did it. But yeah, I mean, definitely, I know, you sound like a teacher, and I'm like, I feel like there's something under all this, but it's probably like really simple, but what do you say?
Well, you remind me a little bit of my paternal grandfather. Both of
You're
you.
calling me old.
No. You just remind me of my grandfather.
Thank you.
You seem melancholy. That's
Sorry, what?
You seem very melancholy. Not exactly happy. It's not a bad thing, but that's, as you were talking, it was like, that's what I got from you.
And you would know where you met me?
We met before. It's hard to see, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it really is hard to see.
Can you give me a clue?
You're about to do something for the room in which I'm in charge of.
Oh, Kingwood Center.
Nope.
Kingwood Center. Civil War.
Oh,
Yeah, we just met a few weeks ago. We're going to meet again soon, too.
I'm each one of you, and
I know what I'm going to say. This is easy for me. Because you are similar in my what I do at times, which is an instigator. and a catalyst. Because it is fun to stir the pot, and that's kind of what this whole symposium is about. Is like, I know these people for the most part, and I almost know verbatim what they're going to say, but when we can come together and share this experience, and now if I can include you guys and add you guys to this couch next time, that's what I want. So we can sit down and have coffee, because this is just the starting point. This is only a 10-minute conversation, 12-minute conversation per person. Now my job, this is the starting point. The hard job is now to continue this and meet with you and talk with you and build this community, and then for you guys to go out and do the same damn thing. I can only do so much. We have to do this together. This is the easy part. You guys come. You know what you're here for. The people that didn't come is the people we got to get to. I'm sorry. I'm going to need your help. What?
he's one of the two people who's known me a little better.
You don't stir the pot at all, do you?
What?
You don't stir the pot at all, do you?
Hell no. We did something up in that stage together.
Yes, we have. And we'll do it again, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions?
All right. I got a question for you. As somebody who transitioned into an independent party, a lot of times you'll have the left fight the rights all monsters. the less so monster. You think that the real monster is the divide between the parties?
I think it's that. I think really, and I really need to. I'm on a path of just like learning about a lot of things, and I really shouldn't put the blame on the party because it really is individualized. There's monsters in every group, and I've met some pretty great people on both ends who want to see, better communities, and I've seen people on both ends who are they're jingos. So yeah, I think that lies the monster, but also I think I shouldn't really focus much more on parties because it's not really the parties themselves. It's so vast, Like I know people in the Democrat Party who are pro-life. I know Republicans who are pro-choice. So it's just deeper than what we know. I hope I answered that.
I just like watching it though.
How do we begin to teach our children to confront their monsters before they become huge monsters and disrupt their lives? I mean, so many of the children today are having trouble with mental illness at a younger and younger age. How do we as a community, as parents, as mentors, start to teach them how to deal with those monsters or avoid them when they're young?
So I believe these are learned skills. When you walk through understanding why things are happening and you're relating your fears to them, and you are coming out on the other side with an action that seems like it is reflective and inquisitive, you are only really able to do that if you are in a safe space. So it's difficult to think, we need to work on how people within the family structure are working on themselves and how they're feeling in regard to their community, their work, how people are reacting to them. Some of the things that Deanna is mentioning, even food access. So all those things environmentally add up. And if, as an adult, you're feeling those things, answer your own question and how you think those kids feel that. And what actually are the chances of those children being able to self-regulate themselves if they are growing up with the same stressors that their families are? I do believe that we've made some educational efforts in trying to teach kids within school systems how to manage themselves and how to really kind of recognize where they're at mindfully, at this place, at this time, this is how I feel, recognizing it as a first step, and then giving some children some answers of how to make some choices if they can be in a safe space to move to that frontal lobe to then make a choice that, I'm going to pause and I'm going to think about this for a minute. And after I think about this for a minute, I'm probably going to be able to make a better choice.
And that was for all of you.
Well, my answer to your question is threads. Like the reference I made to the shamanic training about the idea of someone being able to fly from one point to the next, whether it's a literal thing or just something you do in your mind, that is a connection point between you and what is outside of you. If I may get very personal for a moment, as a young person who felt very out of place in the world and disliked a lot of things that he saw in the world and disliked a lot of things he saw in himself, I did not expect to stay in life for the long haul. But I thought the logical thing to do is to stay around until I'm at least 30 years old and see if I can figure out anything at all about life. And along the way, as long as I had committed to being around for a few years, I thought, well, I at least during this period of time should do what feels right to me, and that is writing, artistic things, creative things. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the novel by Sylvia Plath called The Bell Jar. It is a fictional story, but it very much came from Plath's sense of isolation. A bell jar is a device which oxygen can be sucked out of, so it's an airless chamber of thick glass. And if you were inside that, not only would you not have air, but you'd be able to see through that glass to see the world out there and not be able to connect with it. And you know, that was a terrifying book when I read it, because that's what I felt like at that time. But I, at least, having given myself a little bit of room, decided I would do my creative things. And as I did my creative things, each little thing I did, each person that I worked with, was a thread connecting me to that person. A thread running through the bell jar to the outside world. And I didn't realize what I was doing at first, but bit by bit, I grew this network of threads to people outside of myself. And if you have a strong enough network of threads, you could lift the Great Pyramid of Giza. What I discovered by the time I was 30 years old was that I had fallen in love with the world and the people in it. And it was not a place that I was willing to leave. So, threads.
It's funny that you said that, because that's exactly what I was saying. I was definitely going to say two things. One, the golden rule. I mean, I just feel like it's the most basic thing that we can teach human being. It hurts to get hit, so don't hit. You know, I think that that's super. It hurts to be excluded, so don't exclude. It hurts to be bullied, so don't bully. But I think, too, as a community, and I learned this from my very good friend, Jim Kulig, who has taught me a lot about the circle of courage, and that in many indigenous cultures, you can tell how well the culture is doing by asking how are the children doing. And however the children are doing, that's a good gauge of how well that community is doing. And so we looked at that in talking about what I just talked about earlier, the center and turning the neighborhood around. How are the children? That's our gauge for that. So I think it's a really good question. And we look at that by 4 different things. One would be belonging, creating a community, a neighborhood, a school environment, or whatever, where kids feel like they belong. The second one would be independence. And so a place where they feel like they can gain a sense of independence. To me, that's what helps face that fear, because you know you actually can do it. And then the third was mastery, that they can master things. There are things that they know they can feel good at and they can be successful at. And then the last is generosity. So being able to become a contributor. I think among those things, we would have a much healthier community if at very young ages we started there.
All great things. I mean, it's my kids are both just in college, and it is a daily worry ultimately. But my magic was to marry a Catholic Argentinian and put motherhood in the center of the family. That was really crucial for my children's upbringing. But I do, I think the challenge that we have as parents at this point is that our kids are growing into a world that we are unfamiliar with. And that's the unsettling part of it. And kids know when you don't know. And we've got a whole lot of adults who really don't know at this point, like, what is going on here? And that's a difficult, what do we do with our kids in the face of that? I'm a historian, a U.S. historian. I know there are cycles of fundamental change that take place in the political culture of the United States every 20 to 30 years or so. And I think we're in the midst of that on spades because of the digital revolution. And our kids have grown up in a space because of the digital revolution that is fundamentally different than our experiences in anything we can experience. And so part of my conversation with my kids about that is to learn from them as well. Because I do believe this, I don't think we're on the brink of Armageddon. I think we're in the midst of some significant tectonic types of changes, but Americans have always landed on their feet. I don't have any doubt that they're going to land on their feet again, and it's going to be my kids who are doing that. So I feel as though I can help them to a certain point and to empower them to kind of deal with whatever this is that we're going through.
Yeah.
What was the question?
You really need to ask?
That's where I'm going to plug here, y'all.
How do we prepare, teach our kids to deal with monsters?
Oh, okay.
How do we prepare?
Honestly, I think parents are like kids themselves. I'm not a kid, but just, you know, my mother being a single parent and raising 3 kids, you know, she was kind of going through the motions, and she didn't really have, you know, she had maybe some good supports in her life, but I think a lot of parents, whether it's a nucleus family or not, they're still overcoming things that they never really resolved. And I think once you recognize that, when you help them recognize it, I think they can use those like hardships and like those lessons that, you know, that they're still learning and instill in their kids. But not just your kid, but other people's kids. I think that's why mentorship is so important. I think we're all hurting. I think we're all lonely, and I think we're all broken. I think we all have a lot of unresolved shit in our lives that we keep putting back and putting back. And I think once we face it and we quit letting it haunt us, we can use those things to really empower the next generation while we're getting our own personal healing.
Okay. Once again, it takes the village, doesn't it?
Please do, go ahead.
One of the things that I think about when I think about monsters, it feels like, especially with kids and mental health issues and grown-ups, adults with mental health issues, or just some of the divisiveness that's going on, it feels like the monsters are really lies in disguise. And so when you think about a kid, I think about, because I had some wacky people in my life growing up, and so everything that I developed a phobia about started out as a lie. And, you know, like shots don't, just little things, like shots don't hurt. Oh, those bats won't fly in your hand. Oh, you know, all this crap, and then you get to school and you go to, you know, you study history and you realize at some point later on that you've been taught lies all along. You didn't really learn the real truth. And all these lies that perpetuate, they create things like racism, misogyny, all these different things that kids are actually, because they're not being told the truth about what's real. And now adults, we perpetuate the lies and we create divisiveness between each other because we're not truth tellers. And I think that if people could figure out how to become, and I don't know if you agree with me or if you've had experiences like that, I guess that's my question. How do we get to a path where people become truth tellers?
Well, first of all, if I may, Andrea Rittmer's topic would be perfect for this answer, I think, because her topic was going to be the properties of nostalgia, basically. And like the fruit, the crystal fruit that was Madison and Wade, and how people are outraged by that. And the fruit is just sitting there, waiting to be played after, 200 years. So why should we play it? We hold on to nostalgia and we put it in this special place, and therefore we can't talk about it, or we have to put it on a pedestal. So like the Civil War, Confederate Civil War statues that are being torn down and stuff like that, the nostalgia tied with that is ridiculous at times. And, or because some of those were even built in the 40s and 50s by the KKK. We put them on a pedestal because they were Civil War people, north or south. Nowhere else you can see the non-victor statues. So to put something like that on a pedestal is even more absurd, I think, at times.
So we perpetuate the lines.
What's that?
We perpetuate the lines.
Yeah, we do.
I
And then at
remember
times,
the Trail of Tears.
the other thing is, we don't talk about it. Like, if our child is acting up, and I don't have any children, so they may speak out of turn, but, you know, our kid doesn't have that problem. They do. My child does not, he was just acting out. He doesn't have any real issues. And he might, but we're not going to deal with that. We're going to be quiet and hush and put our head in the sand and actually not deal with our own problems.
Well, I think your point is excellent, and I think something to address that is to apply what Deb was saying, the why. Why do people tell those little lies? It's because there's something they can't deal with, there's something they don't want to confront. Well, if they can't deal with that or can't confront it, we have to figure out why and give them a way so that they can deal with, so that they can speak the truth and not have to distort things or lie.
Or why did they start believing the lies?
That's a great question.
So there's this concept called ethical fading. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say that's false evidence appearing real.
It is. And so the concept of
Excuse me,
ethical
can I
fading.
ask, it's getting, I might be the only one having this problem, but it's getting increasingly more difficult to hear some of you because you had different, whatever. Can we pass the mic to something? Because I got a hunch some valuable information is being shared. I'd like to hear it all.
Say it again. Can you repeat? I didn't hear what you said.
Okay, is that okay?
Thank you.
All right. I was saying that's false evidence appearing real. It's exactly what I just was saying.
Right.
Some evidence, but it's fake.
And so we all know what ethics is, right? And an understanding of how we sort of center ourselves around doing what is theoretically right. The problem with ethics is everybody has a different determination on what ethics is. So if we could all take a midline for a minute and understand, pretend that we're at the same ethical point, that fading of that ethical point starts to begin with those small lies like Mark was talking about. But what happens is the small lies build up, and it becomes a larger problem. And then if everybody does it, eventually it becomes a cultural problem where you're digging into your question and saying, oh my goodness, what is truth and what is not truth? And the problem is when you're constantly seeking for truth from somebody, you can't trust them. And then when you want to be the bigger, better person that steps in to saying, why are they doing that? Why are they about that? Why do they feel they need the approval of that? There's a million whys, right? Why did that kid sock that kid in the face? Why are those parents ignoring that kid who clearly is acting out for a reason? Why are they doing that? So when you lose the trust and when you are unable to really understand where people live, it is a cultural problem.
So if you only did high school history, you've never learned history. History is not taught in the public schools as the very rigorous discipline that it is. It's taught as a form of patriotism and nationalism. It's designed to kind of create this affinity. And so I think there's a bigger problem though when you, so first let me say some people do lie, and they do lie intentionally. And if you're looking at an advertisement, you can count on the fact that you're being lied to, right? There are settings and forms, But this bigger idea that there are people out there lying about this really for me begs the question of knowledge itself, right? So I'm a professional historian. The things that some people in the public sphere are saying, well, nobody's teaching this, nobody's talked about this. Well, we've been teaching it for like 50 years. If you advance into a college history education, you're going to confront that. And so the problem with knowledge is that none of us are God. And none of us have omniscience. And so we're all working with a thin sliver. And my feeling about most people is that they're struggling to do their best with that thin sliver that they're working with. And if we recognize that, we can kind of go, well, yeah, there's some liars out there. And, you know, I tell my kids, let someone teach you who they are the first time and believe them and stick with it. But most people, and I believe this to be true, are really genuinely struggling within a fairly limited bandwidth of what they know and then what they think they know and what everybody says we all agree on. And we're all together never going to be God. And so I approach that question with a whole lot of humility. And I don't assume just because I'm a trained historian that somehow I know something better than somebody who isn't. And for me, it's not a question of truth or lies unless it's, well, that person is lying to me and I see it. It's a question of what is the bandwidth that person's working with that I can get at, because I don't believe we all have different ethics. I don't believe that's the case at all. I think that we all possess a certain foundational set of ethical dispositions. We see it erupt in children, the sense of fairness, the way they organize games. I think that's innate in us, and I think we all share that. And what's that? Yeah, something along those lines. I mean, it can come out of a whole lot of different sources, but I think it's universally shared. And so when we start from the premise that somebody's lying and I know the truth, we deny that reality altogether.
May I respond to that? Because I think I was looking at it as a bigger, more metaphorical kind of thing on how our society is. You're taking it down to individuals.
Well, I was
that's
saying on the social level.
well, that's where it starts, but I'm not talking about liars. I'm talking about people, and you're talking about entitlement. Not everybody gets an opportunity to go to college and study history.
That's right.
To a greater extent.
That's right.
We rely on our public school systems and our taxpayer monies to keep those where they're supposed to be, and we're not doing that. But I think that there's a lot of people that enjoy remaining ignorant about the truth of things. And so they tend to perpetuate because they can. Who are these others?
Who are these others that are willfully choosing to be ignorant?
I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Who are these others that are willfully choosing to be ignorant?
Oh, well, I could just go on and on. I mean, the list is, honestly, I'm talking about a lot of politicians right now.
Okay, well, so that's like advertisements. You know that these people are lying. You know they're playing the game.
No, I'm not talking about what's on TV. I'm talking about a woman that came up to me the other day and said, I would wish you a good day, but you're ruining our country. You know, people like that have become so divisive based on things that they hear and they believe, and they're not true. And so they're mentoring the children. Children are hearing these things. Children are not learning history. They're not learning what systemic racism truly is, because the adults don't want to believe it's real. And go ahead, Deanna.
That's such a loaded thing, Susan.
I know.
The way I personally have tried to work on some of these things, one, I was very, very, very for a long time really political, and then I'm almost the complete opposite now. And the reason for that is, this is why Aurelio is one of my heroes, because what he did was risky, and I think that, but I understand what's at the heart of what he's trying to do, and I think we all kind of have to do that, because I think it's when we go into these groups, okay, when we go into these groups, and this is what we believe, then I think that's where we just start having problems, because then whatever this group is, then that group is whatever. And it's not to say that some of the things they say or do may be totally horrible, inappropriate, or just plain wrong. I just really think that as a society, we have to start moving away from that, and we have to start coalescing with people who are going in the direction we're going in, and let the direction set the group. So, for example, what Aurelio is saying, you know, if you're part of the party, then it can look traitorous, or it can look like a win for the other party, right? It can look bad either way. But in reality, we need people who are going to be able to look at an issue and being the person who the public has elected, be able to address the issue, you know, without some of that. So I think it's the groups, because the groups then have other things that they believe, and the more people you start putting under, and I think that as we navigate, every single choice we make is a crossroad, right? And so every single time we confront an issue, we have a choice that we can make.
Yeah. It's kind of like churches, what churches are doing now too. They're perpetuating these things with people. I mean,
But you just, yeah, but I think you should just be mad all the time. So all you have to do is just, like, honestly, like, I really do feel this way. I really do feel for my own well-being. I've had to extract myself from that. If there's a vision I'm moving towards, I have to move towards that, and the people who share that vision will move with me. But I will not base my decision-making on where we all stand on abortion, or where we all stand on this and that. I can very well see when someone is wrong and when someone is ignorant. We can see that. And I think that for me, it is about remaining, and it's so weird that I'm saying this, but it is about maintaining a level of independence as a human being, and us coalescing as humans, and not necessarily as a party. It's better for our community when both sides can talk. It's better. It's just better.
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, it's just better.
I'm just saying that I do believe that a lot of lies turn into monsters.
Yeah.
For and that was really my whole
It's the absolute truth.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, do critical thinking skills exist?
Where?
Well, I'm thinking, you know, how do we arrive at truth? And isn't there a process that exists that's called critical thinking that ought to lead us to some facts that allow us to make decisions?
Well, so that's what we're doing every single day,
Yeah.
right? And the disadvantage that we have is that we're stuck here in the present, and that's all we got, and it's emerging in place. And that future we dream of is never going to come, because we're going to be stuck here forever, and we can do nothing about the past that's behind us. And so I don't think there's a lack of critical thinking. I mean, I am a deep admirer.
I'd like to relate this to the discussion you're having about children and what we can do to be helpful to the kids.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that if there is such a process as a critical thinking process, one of the things we can do is to assist our kids to learn thinking critical skills. So in spite of what we believe or other believes, we got these smart kids out there that can kind of figure it out themselves based on how we taught them to do that. And maybe that's an ideal world in someplace else, but I'd like to believe that exists.
It does exist, and it is realistic to aim for. And it is very difficult to put your finger exactly on how to do it. But we understand a great deal more about neuroscience and how the brain works, and where people stay in their thought patterns when they're living in that flight, fight, fear, even surprise can drop your level and your ability to think, and you stay in that lower brain. When you have the ability to peak things like curiosity and take a look at things like compassion and fairness, that it actually allows for the process. And this isn't just children, but we are teaching this to children, that when they are able to get into that frontal lobe and up that amygdala, that their ability to be creative and their ability to actually put tools in place, mindful tools, such as taking a pause before they say something, taking a pause before they write an answer on a test, taking a pause that says, okay, well, I hear you saying that, but what you haven't thought about in this is an additional 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can leave it up to kids to tell you where you're wrong, for sure. They will, if they are thinking at their ultimate capacity, create that same thing that Kip was talking about, where we can actually rely on them to make better decisions than we do.
Well, perhaps if adults could model a way of making better decisions, kids could also learn from that. We do a atrocious job of modeling how to go about deciding.
I think in terms of the phobias and the untruths, I think it's really complex because every culture, every ethnicity, there's already fragmentation within those groups. And I think that there's people may be aware of those phobias and those untruths, but I think there's also a level of comfort because it's all you know. Not to justify or make excuses for it, but it comes from all directions too. And I think it's everything that they've said are great examples of how you overcome that. But I think with technology and everything else, we're exposed to all kinds of radical things anyway, which doesn't help. And I think it goes back to like having those significant people in your life, if you have them, and the mentorship. I mean, and the constant socialization of people who are far different from you, but those happen all the time. I mean, like my household, there's things that we knew was not true, but it was just like we chose to look at people in a different way, even though we knew it was wrong. Coming from a really poor background, it was some sort of like gratifying elevation, which is really kind of it's like it was. But I don't know. I think hopeful that it's just kind of like intricate to really tackle it because it's in all areas, and that's my 2 cents.
You and I both think that critical thinking is critically important, but it made me think of the thing that Kip was saying about the monsters that are invisible or very difficult to see. There are a lot of forces in this world that benefit from people not being able to think critically.
And I was also just going to say, I think it's really important that we start having, as a society, start having our children look inwards to fortify themselves inside. And I don't think that we necessarily always think about that, but they are going to have to be armed with their own, they're going to have to overcome their own things. And sometimes it's just you at that crossroad by yourself. And so I think that a lot of intentionality has to go into, and this is me as a grandparent talking now. So I have 5 grandchildren and I'm in contact with them daily. I'm a Facebook grandmother. They live on both coasts, one in San Diego and 4 in South Carolina. And my children are baby parents, right? So I don't trust their parenting 100% yet. They are wonderful parents. They are very good parents. But I realize that my children are baby parents. And I always wondered why my grandparents had so much of an influence on me, but they knew not to trust my parents. So I think there's something to be said about multi-generational relationships, I should say, and households, and the value that the older people bring either in guiding the parents. So when we talk about technology, it's really, really stark. Unfortunately, I'm still working and I'm up with technology and all of that, but I think about if these things would have happened with my grandparents, like they would not have known how to do any of these things. And so, recognizing that now my parents are parents, my children are parents, and they're looking at this, like when my son had explained to my 11-year-old grandson, George Floyd, that situation, things like that. And my two sons called me very, very upset, visibly upset, but had really talked about how do I teach him this, tell him what's going on, explain to him what racism is, the things he's gonna face as a black man one day and as a boy, and not make them hate people. How do you teach them that? How do you teach them to keep themselves safe at the same time to not be afraid of people? So I think that's something I called my father on and asked him to help me help my child to help his child. So I think that, you know, there's a wisdom that we have that is there that also I think we should not discount in the raising of kids. I think that, you know, you can teeter into that nostalgia depending on what the grandparents always believed necessarily, and you can pass down bad things. But basically, I'm just saying, having that child, that wisdom, you need that there, because my kids have never done this before, you know. So that's another thing I think that we often forget is the importance of a grandparent in a child's life as well.
And I would say even beyond that, that the community around that too, like that's most of human existence. Children grew up in a setting where there were multiple adults who were caring for them, and even I grew up in a neighborhood where multiple adults were caring for the kids who were running around. And I think in addition to having elders in the family, having a neighborhood, a community of people who take those kids and see those kids as an extension of themselves. And that's what seems to be so lacking, is that our kids' time is either on the screen or at some designated specific event, and they're following the rules and they're doing these things because if you don't do that, you're not going to get into college and you won't get your scholarship, et cetera, et cetera. And they lose that valuable socializing time with others outside their family, and the necessity to negotiate space and figure out differences and all that. I think we're a generation into that being absent from children's lives unless parents are being really purposeful and intensive about that.
I want to put in a little plug for this place specifically because I know that my life, everything I do is informed by the fact that I did theater and learned early on that you don't have to just be friends with the people your age, the people you're around, the people that you're in class with. You can make those connections with people of all different ages, all different types. So that's the kind of thing. The coming together in a place like this to do things, whether it's plays or something like this, oh, this makes such a difference. It's amazing.
How do we get away from the media? Because the media, on one hand, is supposed to make us inclusive and show how we should get along and everything, but the media tends to focus on the differences, not the negativities.
Turn it off.
No. We're talking about our children. We're talking about our children.
Yeah, so
They aren't even knowing us all.
Why is the media doing what the media is doing? Ask why.
Watch this hand so I can put it where I need to.
But, so to me then, the people getting shot by policemen, the media kind of instigates a lot of it, in my opinion, because they're focusing on it, they're showing this, and it makes this division within our community. The whole time they're saying, oh, we're inclusive, we're coming together, we're taking care of everyone.
So there's a very real and solvable problem that lies at the heart of what you're talking about, and it's the algorithms, right? So right now, all of the algorithms are designed to keep eyes on the screen, and every social psychology study tells you that blood leads, that if you've got something horrible, it's better than something wonderful. And all they're doing is having the computers tell them what kids are, what human beings are looking at, and we can't help ourselves. That's what we do.
So
They could change the algorithms to not do that. That's code. That's not nature. That's not something that fell out of the sky by accident. That's not something we can't do anything about. It is literally about recoding. And that could be done with national legislation in a second. But this divide that we have between our parties makes us focus on these other things over here, and not the heart of some of these issues that we could actually solve. We could change it tomorrow.
So we see what we want to see. Do we agree we see what we want to see?
Right, yeah. Right. I mean, I'm really purposeful in my social media. I wasn't initially. I was like Facebook came. I met all the high school people I had forgotten about, and all the family members I'd lost. And I was like, oh, this is how we fill out. But after a few years, it became clear to me that they were using me, and that it needed to be a purposeful thing. And so everything that I do is curated at this point, and my social media experience is much better than it used to be, because those algorithms feed what it is that I'm feeding to it. So we're a little bit in control of that, but they don't want anybody to know about that. The other thing that should be attached to that is if you're using social media, you're selling your data, you're giving your data away to the social media companies, and that's billions and billions of dollars. And they could easily put a small tax on those exchanges, and we could all get paid for our data time. Right? That's how you fund the universal basic income. The money's out there.
There you go. When are you running for president?
My wife will let me.
This might be a good place to. So I think this might be a good place to close this part down, and we might retire to the Phoenix and have a pint, and we can continue the discussion. Unless there's one or two more questions, we can do that. So, yes, please.
Growing up, quote unquote, when does that happen? 18, 21?
I think we're also growing up.
It's, life is a playground.
Oh, yeah.
No one grows up. We're all learning.
I feel like, I don't know what this one, I feel like, you know, I'm 46. I feel like it's like the 46 has been prelude to actually living. And with my grandmother, she was 86 when she passed, or 88. And she was still embracing, like, she was still curious. She was asking questions. She didn't give up on things that she was too old for doing. I think that we're never going to grow up, and I think that is the beautiful thing about being who we are. I think the minute we quit asking questions is when we stagnate and we rust. The minute we quit being adventurous and just putting ourselves out the pasture, that's when we grow old. But I think we're always going to be kids, and I don't know. I mean, we don't have all the answers, and so I think it's a beautiful thing. I don't want to grow up.
I was going to say, I have a theory about this as well. I'm glad you asked that question. Because my grandmother is still living. She's 96. And my father is 73. And I'm 53. And I have a son who'll be 33. And so it's very funny because I often ask people, how old are you inside? How old is the person who's looking out of your eyes? And people always go, I never thought about that, Deanna. I don't know what that means. But I'll say, how old is the person who's looking out of your eyes? Because I very much remember when I became this person, I was 22. I very much remember a change in my life when I was 22. And I pretty much feel like I've stayed there in terms of who I am inside. Okay, the body ages, but that's how I feel. And so I asked my father that. And my father said, God, I never thought about it. I don't know. Probably in my 20s, I guess. I don't know, 22. And I said, really? So I asked my grandmother and her sisters who were there. We were at a family reunion, and her sisters are in their 80s or whatever. And I asked all of them, and every single person told me in their 20s. And she is 96 years old. She can still move around and all of that. And she has her mental faculties and everything. But she said, I've never thought about that. I said, so how does it feel to be 96 with the spirit of a 22-year-old? And she said, lonely. She said it's lonely because people interact with you like you're an old lady. And so I just think that's so interesting that you said that, because that is one of my favorite things to ask people is, how old do you feel? And I think most people will tell you, inside I really don't feel that old. The person looking outward, it's what people look at us inward where we start to age.
So for me, time is really shifted. I am in this life to like win it. I'm in to play hard, but I think that, so Deanna asked me, well, how old do you feel on the inside? And I said, I don't know. It's a little confusing for me. My body hurts. I feel like I lost time. And so now I feel like I have to like live every single moment. And I want to tell you that I do my absolute best to do that. And I think it takes a huge commitment to say to yourself, no, I deserve joy. And I also deserve not to squash my joy. And somehow when we get out of childhood, we think, oh, well, we're pretty much done learning. And when we're out of childhood, we have to quit playing. And that if we play, we have to play in this way. And I think you get to make your own rules.
Well, folks, I would like to thank every single person in this room, all of our wonderful speakers tonight, everybody who asked a question, everybody who came and attended and supported this really incredible night. I'm really glad you came and got to be a part of it. And everything was new to me as well, and it's so enjoying to hear every one of you speak. Some of you I know well, some of you I don't, but every single person told and taught things tonight that I didn't know about. And it was a real pleasure to be here. So thank you to everybody. And I hope we can make this happen again. And thank you, Brian, for putting it together.
I would like to ask you to give these people a wonderful round of applause. They are so and thank you guys for joining us also. So we will see you in the Phoenix. Thank you again, guys. Have a good night.